What's going on, everyone? Phil here, and welcome to KO Gaming. You know, recently it was just announced by Sega that 2017 was going to be a huge year for Sonic the Hedgehog. There were going to be two very high-profile new games released that were going to reboot the series and bring it into the modern era after the character had basically been kind of through the ringer in the past decade or so through various iterations in the series that really didn't catch on with the mainstream consumer. But did you know that 10 years ago, Sega already had tried to do exactly the same thing? That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Recently, I had the pleasure, or displeasure, I guess, to play the Sonic the Hedgehog reboot from 2006. Now, I want to basically put you into this perspective because it really was a different era. The Xbox 360 and the PlayStation 3 had just launched within the past year. The game developers had not yet gotten a grasp on the new technologies that these consoles could handle, and a lot of games that were being released in the first year or so just were very subpar and not very good. So when it was announced that Sonic the Hedgehog was getting this current generation reboot and that they were going to do revolutionary things with the series that had never been done before, people were blown away and they rushed to the stores in droves to check out this brand new series of this long but much loved mascot from Sonic. And unfortunately, the game kind of went down to live in infamy as a game that had so much potential that was completely squandered by a game that felt unfinished, unpolished, and just downright buggy and broken in a lot of places. What happened with Sonic the Hedgehog 2006? Well, way back when, in 2007, I actually tried this game out for myself when I had purchased a PlayStation 3. It was one of the very first games I ever played on the console, and I couldn't even get past the first stage because it was so broken. So recently, thanks to the demand of my patrons and viewers, they said, we want to see you try out this game because you've never done it for YouTube before, and I played a full playthrough of it over on my DSP Gaming channel. What I like to do in this video is outline my experience with the game, what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, my overall feelings about it, and then I'm going to reveal a little bit of behind the scenes information about the development of the game that you might not know of, and then we'll kind of get a better picture. So here goes. Just booting up Sonic 2006 immediately kind of blows you away. You're opens up to this pretty awesome soundtrack that's very unique to the game, and you can tell they actually put a lot of time and effort into the music. It's got orchestral stuff, it's got a lot of kind of guitar riffs and a combination of different instruments and stuff in the background music of the game. It's catchy, and you'll find yourself kind of humming the tunes and having the music stuck in your brain, similarly to previous Sonic titles where, you know, the music was always kind of synonymous with something that was catchy, and I think that's one of the things that the game actually gets right. In addition, the visuals, just playing the game for a few minutes and going through the initial parts of the game where you realize, wow, this game runs at a pretty solid 60 frames per second, at least most of the time. There are some times when the frame rates dip, but you have to remember that this game was from 2006. This was the very early stages of the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. They really hadn't gotten a handle on the hardware yet, and the fact that this Sonic team was able to put together a game that looked this good early on in the stages of this console generation is pretty impressive in my opinion. And really the thing that stands out about Sonic 2006 is that they really went in a different direction. Was it meant to be this kind of platformer game with certain kinds of elements that you were familiar with? Yes and no, but they combined that with almost an arcing RPG style system where you have an open city that you're roaming through and you buy upgrades and you do side mission content in order to earn rings to buy better upgrades for your characters. You have control of 3 completely different characters that you can switch between on the fly and get 3 different perspectives because they each have their own interarching stories with a unique time loop, time travel mechanic kind of plotline that had never been done. You never had a Sonic the Hedgehog game up to this point that had such a serious kind of plotline before and took its characters so seriously. I mean, just look at the cutscenes fully rendered. This reminds me of like playing a Final Fantasy game, not Sonic, and it has so many parallels to that kind of a style of epicness. You would think just by starting up the game that, wow, a lot of time and effort and production value went into this game and it just looks so nicely polished, and then you actually start to play the game. Sadly, it's the primary gameplay mechanics of Sonic 2006 that fall on their own face. It's not that there's not any fun factor, and it's not that there aren't levels and parts of the game that function properly. There absolutely are. I think what they were going for with the game was a very fast-paced, action-based platformer with some puzzle mechanics and a little bit of searching and open-world exploration, which I think they kind of wanted you to do, rather than just kind of rush through the game. And it is unique in the fact that each character has a little bit of difference to them. You know, Sonic is the fast-paced runner who will move through these stages really quickly and can use his homing dash, which he's had for a few games now, to bounce off of certain enemies and move on floating through the air. Shadow has that ability as well, but also has this meter that charges up, and when he uses it, he gets some superpowers that he can use during combat. And then you've got the new character, Silver. That's just such a unique and different thing from Sonic and from Shadow. He does not have any kind of super speed at all. Instead, he has psychic capabilities, which he uses to pick up crates and other objects and throw them at enemies. He can also use his abilities to catch the enemy's ammo, such as missiles, and throw it back at them. Later on, he gets a stun attack, which allows you to then grab the enemies themselves and throw them at each other. And he also has the ability to hover long distances, allowing you to cover gaps and go over ledges and things that basically Sonic and Shadow just don't have the capability of doing. So really, when you're playing the game with Silver, it does actually feel like a completely different game than when you're playing with Sonic and Shadow. And at its core, it seems like it sounds like a good idea. You know, you're running fast, you hit a speed pad, you're going at the speed of sound of Sonic, and you're doing loop-de-loops, and you're dodging left and right, and you're bouncing off of enemies, and all of a sudden you go through this little area where you gotta fight off a few enemies, and then you kind of go around a corner, you collect some items, you find a secret, you hit a checkpoint. It's kind of classic Sonic gameplay, but then there's just certain parts of the game that don't make any sense. Like, for example, whenever any of these characters hits one of the speed pads, good luck actually controlling them, because if you either tap left or right on your thumbstick, your character will careen in that direction, making it almost impossible to control them during any of these situations where maybe you have to dodge something while you're running at that speed. Maybe all of a sudden there's a gap coming up where you have to jump, and it's kind of weird because if you technically try to control your character during these segments of the game, you're going to die more often than not, and what you're going to realize is, oh, I should just leave my hand off the controller, I'll hit the speed pad and let the character run through this little segment, and then when they're done running, I'll pick it up again and I'll start playing. But then the game later on starts giving you these kind of beginner's traps, where if you're not ready to jump or dodge or do something during that speed session, you're going to die instantly, and it really becomes a double-edged sword. It's kind of ridiculous. Like, if you want them to move fast, then make a game mechanic that allows you to control your character properly, and they don't do that. Now, to make matters even worse, in a lot of situations in the game, there are these speed pads, but if you hit them, you will die. It's almost like they thought it was a good idea to put that speed boost pad there, but then if you don't use it, you can actually easily survive, while if you do use it, you die. So why is the speed pad there to begin with, unless it's some kind of a beginner's trap? It doesn't make any sense, and it just leads to massive frustration when you're on a part of a level and you're trying to figure out, how do I get past this? Oh, if I just ignore the mechanics that are in front of me and go around them, now I can easily beat it. It's just terrible game design. Let's talk some more wonky mechanics. How about that camera that constantly is getting caught while you're trying to rotate it into a position that you can see forward? Instead, it gets stuck on a wall, it gets stuck on a building, it gets stuck on a ledge, leading you to not know what the hell you're supposed to be doing or where you're going, because it just will not rotate properly. And then there's the situations in the game where you can't even see ahead of you because you're going so fast, you end up running upside down on the ceiling, and you have no idea what's going on. There's literally 3 or 4 segments of this game where there's just no way to tell what you're supposed to be doing, and you're just like, well, I'll just go with the flow, and if I survive, I survive, and if I die, I die, and you just gotta get lucky and just hold on to your ass and pray for the best. I mean, if that's not a badly designed part of the game, I don't know what is. Speaking about those segments where you're running super fast, there's actually 2 particular times during the game where you're not able to slow down, and if you do accidentally maybe hit something or go in the wrong direction, Sonic will go careening off into the fucking stratosphere, or get stuck on a wall, or phase into something. It's just laughable. It's a game mechanic that looks like it's completely unfinished, and they just didn't bother to work on. Then there's the lock-on mechanic that I mentioned earlier, where either Sonic or Shadow are supposed to jump and then be able to actually actually hit something in front of them. It works pretty much about 80% of the time, and then about 20% of the time, they'll just completely whiff and go off into a bottomless pit and die for absolutely no reason, even though what you wanted to bounce off of was directly in front of you. There's many times in the game when there's little things that you're supposed to be doing, such as following a line of rings. You go to do it, you hold down the button, and it doesn't work. And it just doesn't make sense. It should work 100% of the time, and it just doesn't. That's just the tip of the iceberg, though. I mean, there are actual gameplay mechanics and parts of Sonic 06 that just seem like they're unfinished and weren't actually made to be beaten without having previous knowledge of how to cheat the game in order to succeed. For example, there are 2 boss fights against Silver, that's right, there are parts during the game where the different hedgehogs will fight each other, and during these fights, Silver at any time can use a psychic ability to instantly grab you, slam you to make you release your rings, and then instantly grab you again to kill you. If you get grabbed once, you're dead. There's just no way around it. You're going to die if you're in a certain position. So instead of actually fighting him legitimately, you kind of have to trick him and run away from him and then kind of run back and either bounce off and away from him so that he never gets a chance to psychically grab you, or do running slide kicks. And it's obvious this doesn't make sense. You don't fight anything else in the game like this at all. This is made because they basically programmed the boss fights really poorly and didn't know what they were doing. How about some of the stages with Shadow? Now, one of the unique things about Shadow the Hedgehog is that he had his own game. There was a lot of guns and stuff in it, and so they said, how can we translate that into Sonic 06? Oh, I know, we'll put vehicles. You know, we'll have Jeeps that he can drive and hang gliders that he can fly on. And ultimately, none of it really amounts to anything. The hand glider stages are just complete filler. It's almost impossible to die during these stages as long as you're just flying around things that are coming at you. And really, you don't ever have to fire your gun. You could just kind of go on rails. Some of them, you don't even have to touch the thumbstick. You just survive by default. And then there's the stages with the Jeep. There's one where the Jeep is actually necessary because you need it to drive around and destroy these giant lights that are kind of shining down these watchtowers in order to proceed. But then there's a stage called Crisis City, where the city is falling apart, and you've already played the stage with Sonic, so you know that this Jeep is not necessary in order to beat the stage. If you get in that Jeep and drive, you die. There's actually no way to complete the stage by using the vehicle. They put it there and probably intended to design a way in the stage to actually use the vehicle, but you can't. If you get in that vehicle, you cannot make the jumps and you cannot actually progress throughout the stage. It's actually a beginner's trap that's going to lead to a cheap death when you drive off into the bottomless pit, and then you realize after a few tries, damn, I wonder if I don't use that vehicle, what happens? And then you easily beat the stage. It's just ridiculous. The game screams unfinished and incomplete. How the hell did this get through testing? And then there's the fact that the pacing of the game is absolutely everywhere and all over the place. Some stages, if you just kind of beat them easily, you know, walking through them, you can beat them within 2 to 3 minutes. Then there are other stages that seem like insane difficulty gauntlets with so many enemies coming at you and just so much challenge. First you have to fight a ton of enemies, then you have to do a bunch of crazy difficult platforming with a lot of instant death traps. Then once you get past that, you have to go through a super speed running portion of the stage. Oh, by the way, if you run out of lives during any portion of this stage, you have to start from the very beginning. And some of these stages actually can be upwards of 25 minutes or longer. So there's such a dichotomy between a stage you can beat on your first shot running through it within a couple minutes and another stage that's made so incredibly long, it doesn't make sense, and it makes the game feel more disjointed and not really connected. In addition, there's the fact that each character has to basically play the same stage. Even though there's 3 completely separate characters in the game with Sonic, Shadow, and Silver, they all end up going through the same exact stages with little twists. For example, you're going through a temple, and for one character, the temple might just simply be a boss fight and nothing else, but for another character, that temple has these ridiculously difficult ball puzzles where you have to roll balls down really long hallways and get them into holes to get doors to open. But then when you play that game with another character, it's completely different again. Different enemies, different things, and so the same exact environments are reused 3 times throughout the game. And it's kind of ridiculous because ultimately there's only around 7 different stages, leading to basically you seeing the same stuff over and over with slightly different twists. So the first time you play these stages, you're like, wow, this is new and different. But by the 3rd time you're playing the stage, even though playing with Silver versus playing with Sonic and Shadow is very different, you're still like, I've been here, I've done that, I've seen this, and it ends up making you feel like you're wasting your time and just grinding and going through the motions to beat the game rather than actually seeing anything unique and different, and that's unfortunate. It basically becomes glaringly obvious by the time you finish Sonic 06 that this dev team didn't have enough time, resources, or money to finish the game, and therefore they had to reuse a ton of stuff in order to have the game be as long as it is, clocking in anywhere between, say, 10 to 15 hours of gameplay. Now, I just went through a lot of negative stuff about Sonic 2006, but I just want you to understand, I actually don't hate this game as much as a lot of other people. In fact, I'm happy that I played it. The reason being, because there's actually a lot of cool stuff in the game that I thought, wow, this could have panned out to be an outstanding game that would have been an amazing reboot to the Sonic the Hedgehog series if only all of these negative things didn't exist. For example, the fact that this game has a long, intertwined narrative story between 3 completely different characters with time travel and time manipulation mechanics that you can see from 3 different perspectives. It's never been done in a Sonic game before. It was something completely different that I would expect, again, from like an RPG like Final Fantasy, and certainly not from a game like this. The fact that there is an open world to explore, and instead of being on rails like a lot of Sonic games, in this one, there's a lot to do. There's a lot of hidden secrets, there's a lot of feeling of movement and kind of this being a unique and an organic world rather than just a 2D go from point A to point B stage. I like that feeling. The fact that each character actually has unique bosses that they fight, and yes, some of these bosses are reused, and some characters have to fight them, the same boss more than once. For example, Sonic and Shadow have to fight some of the same bosses, etc. But it does need to be said that the fact that each character does kind of have its own final end boss that's completely different from the others is really neat. And actually going through the story of this game and saying, wow, this character interacted with this boss, but then this character interacted with this other big villain. There really are 3 big villains in this game, and that's pretty cool for a Sonic game. The music, I love the soundtrack of this game. I mean, I don't know how anyone could either listen to the title screen or the final boss fight of Sonic 2006 and not rock out to the tunes. It's awesome, a rock music soundtrack with orchestral elements, and it really makes you feel epic. And it's a shame because it's like, man, if this was put in another game that didn't have all this unfinished stuff and these bugs, the game would have felt like such an amazing achievement and this overwhelming feeling of, yeah, at the end when you're fighting this giant boss and this music is dun dun dun. But then you realize all the suffering you had to go through to get to it, and it's just such a waste. I mean, it's just such a dichotomy. The great graphics, the intuitive stuff that they do with this kind of RPG town, the upgrades that you can buy, side content, 3 stories, so many positives, but then just weighed down by the overwhelming amount of negative crap. And you really have to ask yourself after playing this game, what the hell happened here? Well, keep in mind, it is 10 years later, and a lot of what I'm about to reveal to you is speculation, was never officially confirmed by inside sources at Sega or anything like that, but rumor has it that this game was being rushed for a holiday release, and when it went to the game testers to try out the game and see if this game was fit for sale, they overwhelmingly came back and told management, no, it's not. It's broken, it's messy, it feels like there's parts that were tacked on, it really needs to be made better and more polished. And then the management team fired the game testers, completely ignoring their feedback and saying, well, screw you, we care more about our year-end profits and rushing a game out for holiday sales than actually making a good or functional game that gamers deserve for putting down their hard-earned money. Now, here's the thing. This happens all the time. Games get rushed out before they're ready. The difference here is that Sonic the Hedgehog's reboot came out in 2006. So once the game was released, that was it. There was no chance for them to do patch after patch. If this game were released in 2016 in the modern era, on day 1 there would have been a 5 gigabyte patch that would have fixed the frame rate issue, fixed the lock-on, removed the speed pads that run you to your death, and certain things, would have been fixed at launch, undoubtedly, because that seems how a lot of games work in this day and age. The games are released to retail unfinished, and then you have to get this giant day 1 patch for it to work, and then in some cases it even takes a week or two, and then there's even more additional things games that are expanding or whatever to make it better in the long run. We feel like more like game testers than actual consumers in a lot of cases, and it could take weeks for a game that you buy at retail today to actually be the finished version that feels like a functional game. But Sonic the Hedgehog from 2006 didn't have that luxury. What was out there was out there. They couldn't fix it, and therefore it ended up being a stinky fucking turd. Now, I empathize, I sympathize with the people who worked at Sega at the time, who worked on this game. Can you imagine being someone who worked on the music or the graphical engine, and all of a sudden you find out that this game is going to have incomplete gameplay rushed out for the sake of making numbers for the year end so that the executives could look good on paper and make their big ass fucking bonuses rather than putting out a quality product that people are going to want to review properly and say it's great, and a game that people feel like they got their money's worth? I mean, I feel so bad for the Team Sega employees who were put through that. And the bottom line is, since Sonic the Hedgehog in 2006, there hasn't been another Sonic game on this scale. Yeah, there have been games that have attempted some unique and different things, but nothing on the scale of what Sonic the Hedgehog's reboot attempted. We've had games that are 2D side-scrollers, and we've had games that kind of had 3D elements, but nothing has ever tried to be like Sonic the Hedgehog was again now. This may change for, as you know, 2017 is a big year for Sonic. We've got two completely different styles of Sonic the Hedgehog game coming out, and I think that Sega is trying to bank on the fact that there's still a nostalgia around the character, and that people are still looking for that great reboot that they were promised 10 years ago and were not delivered. So I guess it remains to be seen in 2017. Will Sega actually give time for their games to be done and ready? Will they actually listen to feedback from game testers, or will they go for the cheap payout again? I guess it remains to be seen. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed my retrospective on Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. If you did, please consider giving it a like here on YouTube, and please spread the word about KO Gaming. Also, please check the description of the video for a link to my raw full playthrough of the game over on DSP Gaming, as well as a link to my discount code for Loot Crate and my Patreon. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you right here next time on KO Gaming.